Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're breaking down a really powerful lecture on one of the biggest roadblocks to personal growth, and that's shame. We're going to look at a roadmap for not just facing it, but actually healing from it.
So the speaker, Eun-Suk Kim, she kicks things off with the truth that I think we all kind of feel deep down. Real, meaningful growth, it's not easy. It's not something we just accidentally fall into. She says it's like that biblical idea of entering a narrow gate. It takes real intention, real effort, and you have to face some tough stuff. So why? Why is it so difficult? Well, the idea here is that it's a battle on a bunch of different fronts, against worldly values, our own internal junk, and even what she calls spiritual opposition. And these things don't just slow us down, they can make you want to just throw in the towel completely.
Okay, so a really common way to handle all this, especially today, is to think that logic is the answer, right? If we can just think our way through everything, we can get our messy emotions under control and finally have it all together. But what if that's the wrong approach entirely? What if we've got it all backwards?
And this is where we see two totally different worldviews collide. The first view sees our emotions like this wild elephant, and our mind is the tiny rider, just desperately trying to steer it and hang on for dear life. But the second view, a faith-based one, it just flips that whole script. It says, hey, emotions aren't the enemy here. In fact, they were designed by God for a very specific and very good purpose.
So get this. The original idea was that our emotions were meant to be our moral engine. They were designed to push us toward good things and pull us away from evil things. The feeling itself, whether it's anger or joy or sadness, it isn't inherently good or bad. It's just a signal. The morality, that comes in with what we do with that feeling. So when we try to just shut our emotions down, we're basically turning off our own internal compass. The goal isn't to get rid of them, but to heal them and get them working the way they were designed to.
But of course, something went wrong. The lecture explains that the fall basically corrupted our whole emotional system. It introduced this really powerful, destructive force that doesn't just point out a wrong action, it attacks our very identity. And that force is shame.
And this, right here, is one of the most important distinctions you can ever make. Guilt says, I did something bad. See, it's focused on your actions, and that can actually be a good thing. It can lead you to apologize, to make things right. But shame is totally different. Shame whispers, I am bad. It goes right for your core, your being. And the natural result of shame is to make us hide, put up our defenses, and just isolate ourselves.
But it gets even deeper. The lecture talks about this specific kind called toxic shame. This is the shame you were never supposed to carry. It's a lie about your worth that gets planted deep inside you, usually from old wounds. And to really understand its devastating power, the speaker Eun-Suk Kim, she gets vulnerable and shares her own story.
Eun-Suk Kim's story is incredible because it shows how this toxic shame can really take root and how we build these elaborate defenses just to survive it.
For her, this whole journey with shame, it started literally the moment she was born. She was born into a culture and a family that desperately wanted a son, so her arrival as a daughter wasn't met with joy, it was met with disappointment.
And that feeling, it got cemented in place by this deeply traumatic memory. After a really small, innocent mistake as a child, her grandmother hit her. And in that one moment, a devastating core belief just locked into place in her mind, that her very existence wasn't a source of joy for other people. And that is the voice of toxic shame.
So what do we do when we feel that kind of deep, identity-level shame? Well, we hide. And this brings us to this really powerful metaphor of a fig leaf. Just like Adam and Eve covered themselves in the garden, we create our own defenses. For Eun-Suk, that fig leaf was perfectionism. She figured, if I can just do everything perfectly, study harder, achieve more, never make a mistake, then maybe, just maybe, I can finally earn the joy and acceptance I was denied from the very beginning.
Okay, so this brings us to the big question. If shame is the wound, and these fig leaves are our faulty defenses, how in the world do we find real healing? How do we get back on that narrow road to maturity?
Well, the lecture lays out a really profound spiritual path to healing. It's a process. It involves taking that wounded inner part of you, that little kid hiding behind the fig leaf of perfectionism or anger, and bringing it to a place of ultimate safety and grace, which the speaker identifies as the cross. The goal is this amazing kind of divine exchange. You trade in the lie of shame for the truth of who you really are and your inherent worth.
But this wasn't some journey she took all by herself. A huge turning point came for her when she was in community with other people. It was there, in her relationships, that she had this painful realization of how her fig leaf, her perfectionism, was actually hurting the people she cared about. And that anguish, that moment of seeing the real impact of her own defenses, that became the very thing that started her deep healing and change.
And this all brings us to the final and maybe the most crucial point of this whole explainer. Real maturity isn't about getting rid of our emotions, it's about redeeming them. It's about finally facing our shame instead of trying to hide from it. And the very first step on that difficult, narrow path is to ask ourselves this one simple question. What is the fig leaf I'm using to cover my own wounds? Answering that, well, that might just be the beginning of everything.